The spring of 1944 presented the Allied High Command with a paradox of their own making. They had spent years and immense industrial might building a war machine of unprecedented scale, an army of millions, a navy of thousands of vessels, and an air force that could darken the skies. Yet, the very success of their grand strategy, Operation Overlord, the cross-channel invasion of Nazi-occupied Europe, hinged on solving a deceptively simple, yet potentially catastrophic, logistical problem. How do you fuel a blitzkrieg? From their formidable headquarters in Paris and La Roche-Guyon, German commanders like Field Marshal Erwin Rommel viewed the possibility of a large-scale amphibious assault with a mixture of vigilance and skepticism. Since his appointment in late 1943 to oversee the defenses of northern France, Rommel had driven the rapid construction of the Atlantic Wall, a sprawling network of fortifications, gun emplacements, beach obstacles, and minefields that stretched from the Spanish border to Norway. He scoffed at the notion that the Allies could breach this impenetrable fortress, a sentiment echoed by many in the German High Command who considered the idea a strategic fantasy. This confidence was not entirely without foundation. The Allies faced a monumental task. Even if they could land an army on the heavily defended coast, sustaining it was a problem that seemed to demand a miracle. The heart of this problem was petroleum. The nature of warfare had fundamentally shifted since 1918. This was a war of mobility, of machines. A single M4 Sherman tank, the workhorse of Allied armored divisions, consumed approximately 100 gallons of fuel for every day it was in operation. The entire invasion force, comprising over 150,000 men in the initial assault waves, would require thousands of tanks, trucks, half-tracks, and self-propelled guns. Furthermore, the aircraft providing crucial close air support and the naval vessels bombarding the coast were all insatiable consumers of oil and gasoline. The British War Office estimated that over 60% of the expeditionary force's supplies by volume would consist of petrol, oil, and lubricants, collectively known as POL. The initial, conventional solutions were immediately recognized as dangerously inadequate. Supplying this vast army solely with jerrycans was logistically absurd. It would require a constant shuttle of vulnerable landing craft and would tie up thousands of troops in fuel handling. The Allies planned to ship 20 million jerrycans to the UK and had stockpiled 250,000 long tons of packaged fuel, but this was a drop in the ocean for a sustained campaign. Relying on ocean-going tankers was equally perilous. The English Channel, though narrow, was a deadly gauntlet of German U-boats, E-boats, and aircraft. A few successful enemy attacks on tankers could strangle the entire invasion force on the beaches, leaving its vehicles immobilized and vulnerable to a devastating German counterattack. Storing large fuel depots on the French coast was also out of the question. They would be irresistible and vulnerable targets for the Luftwaffe. The Allied war machine, the most advanced in the world, was in danger of stalling just miles from its starting point, not for a lack of courage or weapons, but for a lack of gasoline. Faced with this seemingly intractable supply dilemma, Allied planners were forced to consider solutions that bordered on science fiction. Conventional wisdom had failed. What was needed was a leap of imagination. That leap occurred in the highest echelons of the British war effort, driven by a man known for his flair for unorthodox ideas. Vice Admiral Lord Louis Mountbatten, the chief of combined operations, was tasked with devising the methods for the Allied invasion. In 1942, he presented a radical proposal to the Secretary for Petroleum, Geoffrey Lloyd. The plan was audacious in its simplicity. They would not ship fuel across the channel in vulnerable vessels. Instead, they would pump it through a pipeline laid on the seabed, directly from England to the beaches of France. To the engineers and petroleum experts who first heard it, the idea was not just ambitious, it was foolhardy. Submarine pipelines were not a new concept, but their application was strictly limited. Short, rigid pipelines were used within the confines of harbors, but no one had ever attempted to lay a flexible pipeline across a body of water as tempestuous as the English Channel. The technical challenges were staggering. The pipeline would have to withstand crushing underwater pressures, strong tidal currents, and the corrosive effects of seawater. It would need to be laid with perfect continuity, as any rupture or leak would be impossible to repair. Furthermore, to avoid detection by German intelligence and to minimize the impact of tides and weather, the entire operation would ideally need to be completed in a single night. The initial military and engineering assessment was blunt. The scheme was unfeasible. The idea was, for the moment, dead. Yet, the problem it sought to solve refused to go away. Even as the pipeline concept was shelved, the Allied logistics machine continued to prepare for D-Day using conventional, high-risk methods. A Plan B was already in motion. 30 new shallow-draft coastal tankers were under construction, designed to run fuel to the French coast once a port was secured. A whole American manufacturing plant was shipped to London to mass-produce the millions of jerry cans required. By 1944, vast stockpiles of fuel were accumulating in the United Kingdom. But every planner knew that these methods constituted a fragile supply chain. If the German Navy and Air Force mounted a determined campaign against the Allied tanker fleet, the entire invasion could falter. The ghost of the failed Gallipoli campaign in World War I, where Allied forces had been trapped on the beaches due to logistical failure, loomed large in strategic discussions. The cross-channel pipeline, however improbable, remained the only proposed solution that offered security, secrecy, and sustained volume. The seed of an idea had been planted, and though it lay dormant, the desperate need for fuel ensured it would not be forgotten. The resurrection of the pipeline scheme did not come from the corridors of military power, but from the practical mind of an industry expert. Clifford Hartley, the chief engineer of the Anglo-Iranian Oil Company, possessed a perspective unburdened by the conventional limitations of military engineering. His experience was forged in the harsh landscapes of Iran, where his team had successfully installed a 3-inch pipeline capable of delivering 100,000 imperial gallons of oil per day over long distances and under enormous pressure. For Hartley, the challenge of the English Channel was not an impossibility, it was a complex engineering problem waiting for a solution. Hartley's breakthrough came from looking at the problem through a different lens. While others envisioned a rigid, segmented pipe, Hartley proposed a continuous, flexible tube. His design was ingeniously based on existing technology, the submarine telegraph cable. He conceived of a pipeline that could be manufactured and stored on giant floating drums, much like communication cable, and laid from a modified cable-laying ship. This marine version of a communication cable, as he described it, would be stripped of its core and insulation and fortified with layers of steel wire armor to withstand the immense internal pressure of pumping fuel. This flexibility was key. It meant the pipeline could conform to the contours of the seabed, absorb stresses from currents, and be deployed rapidly from a moving vessel. Hartley's confidence was infectious. He argued that by laying multiple lines, the system could achieve the vast capacity required by the Allied armies. This audacious proposition, now backed by a credible and detailed plan, quickly gained traction. The project was officially christened Operation PLUTO, an acronym for Pipeline Under the Ocean. The operation was placed under the authority of the Chief of Staff to the Supreme Allied Commander, Cossack, led by the strategic mind of Major General Neville Brown John. The man chosen for the hands-on monumental task of overseeing the day-to-day execution was Captain John Fenwick Hutchings of the Royal Navy. The objective was clear, yet staggeringly complex: to establish a network of flexible pipelines between England and France, pumping fuel directly to the front lines and bypassing the vulnerable sea lanes. The primary route would be a mammoth 130-kilometer pipeline stretching from the Isle of Wight to Cherbourg, creating a direct lifeline between the British coast and the American landing beaches at Omaha and Utah. The foolhardy proposition was now a formal, high-stakes mission of the Allied war effort. With Operation PLUTO greenlit, the project shifted from conceptual theory to immense industrial enterprise. The success of the entire operation hinged on the creation of a pipeline that did not yet exist, one that was both incredibly strong and remarkably flexible. This challenge spurred the parallel development of 2 distinct pipeline designs, a testament to the Allies' determination to overcome technical hurdles through innovation and redundancy. The race to forge the undersea lifeline was on, conducted under the intense pressure of material shortages and a rapidly approaching D-Day deadline. The first design, known as the HAIS pipe, was a product of traditional submarine cable expertise. Developed by Siemens Brothers at their Woolwich works, the HAIS was a sophisticated, layered construction. At its core was a lead pipe, through which the fuel would flow. This was surrounded by layers of paper tape impregnated with compound, which acted as insulation and a barrier. Around this, multiple layers of steel wire armor were applied, providing the tensile strength needed to withstand laying operations and the pressure of the channel depths. Finally, an outer protective layer of jute and tar served as a shield against corrosion and marine borers. The HAIS pipe was flexible and robust, but it had a critical weakness: its dependence on lead. Lead was a strategic material in short supply, and the unthinkable idea of scavenging it from church roofs was wisely discarded. This limitation necessitated a second, alternative design. That alternative was the Hamel pipe, named for its creators, H.A. Hammock and B.J. Ellis of the Iraq Petroleum Company. Where the HAIS pipe was a flexible cable, the Hamel was essentially a continuous steel pipeline. It was constructed from 20-foot lengths of 3-inch steel pipe, joined together with specially designed, quick-assembly screw joints. This design was far more rigid than the HAIS pipe, making it difficult to handle and store. To solve this, engineers developed the Conan drum, a giant floating spool 40 feet in diameter, around which up to 80 miles of the Hamel pipe could be wound. While the Hamel was less elegant, its advantage was its reliance on steel, a resource far more readily available to the Allied war industry. Factories, including the Corby Steelworks, were repurposed to produce the Hamel pipe at a staggering rate of 30 miles per week. Both designs underwent rigorous and urgent testing. Beginning in May 1942, trials were conducted on the River Medway, followed by more demanding tests across the Firth of Clyde and in the turbulent waters of the Bristol Channel. These trials were vital for refining the designs and laying techniques. They revealed, for instance, the need to maintain an internal pressure of around 7 bars during manufacturing to prevent collapse. The tests also proved that the pipelines could withstand the harsh channel environment, and surprisingly, that the required fuel volume could be achieved with fewer pipes than initially estimated. Against all odds, the industrial might of Britain, marshaled by the combined efforts of the Ministry of Fuel and Power, private industry, and academic researchers, had turned a radical concept into a tangible, tested reality in less than a year. June 6, 1944. The dawn broke over the English Channel not to silence, but to the thunderous overture of the largest amphibious invasion in human history. Operation Overlord was underway. From the sea emerged an armada of over 6,000 vessels, a staggering assemblage of battleships, cruisers, destroyers, and a vast fleet of landing craft of every description. They carried the vanguard of the Allied Expeditionary Force, more than 150,000 soldiers destined for the 5 invasion beaches of Normandy. Simultaneously, the sky filled with the roar of over 12,000 aircraft, fighters, bombers, transports, and gliders, weaving a complex tapestry of air superiority and close ground support. This was the culmination of years of planning, a symphony of coordinated force on a scale never before witnessed. On the beaches, codenamed Utah, Omaha, Gold, Juno, and Sword, the theory of modern mechanized warfare became a fuel-drenched reality. As landing craft ramps dropped, it was not only infantry that stormed ashore, but a menagerie of specialized armor designed to overcome the Atlantic Wall. Alongside the standard M4 Sherman and British Churchill tanks came Hobart's Funnies, unique vehicles like the Sherman Crab Flail tank, which cleared minefields with whirling chains, the Churchill AVRE that fired massive petard charges to destroy bunkers, and the duplex drive, DD, amphibious Sherman that swam to the shore. Each of these machines, from the simplest Jeep to the most complex armored vehicle, represented a moving point of fuel consumption. The duplex drive tanks alone, paddling their way to shore, burned through their fuel reserves at an alarming rate just to reach the battlefield. The initial foothold on the continent was not merely a battle for territory, but a race against a logistical clock. The fuel that had powered the invasion fleet and air armada now had to be redirected to sustain the ground forces. The immediate aftermath of D-Day saw the Allies establishing a fragile but expanding beachhead. The Mulberry artificial harbors were being towed into place to offload the mountains of supplies needed to sustain the fight. But the clock was ticking. The breakout from Normandy, planned under the codename Operation Cobra, required a rapid concentration of armored divisions and a relentless mobile advance. This kind of warfare was a voracious consumer of gasoline. General George S. Patton's Third Army, soon to be unleashed, would famously become a spearhead of immense speed and power, but its velocity was directly proportional to its fuel consumption. The success of the entire European campaign now hinged on the ability to solve the fuel crisis that planners had foreseen years earlier. The conventional methods, the tankers and the jerrycans, were already straining under the demand, vulnerable to weather and enemy action. The pressure on the men and machines of Operation Pluto became immense. The theoretical need was now a desperate, operational necessity. With the Normandy beachhead secured, the focus of Operation Pluto shifted from preparation to execution. The theoretical pipelines now had to be laid across a real and still dangerous English Channel. This phase of the operation was a maritime engineering challenge of unparalleled complexity, relying on a small fleet of vessels that had been specially modified for their extraordinary task. The success of the entire endeavor now rested on the skill of their crews and the resilience of the strange, coiled cargo they carried. The 2 pipeline designs necessitated 2 different laying methods. For the flexible HAIS pipe, converted cable layers like HMS Latimer were employed, paying out the pipeline from vast internal tanks in a continuous, controlled process. The more dramatic operation involved the rigid Hamel pipe and its unique delivery system, the Conundrum. The first vessel adapted for this was the former passenger coaster Holdfast, which was fitted with a giant steel drum, 40 feet in diameter, weighing over 1,600 tons when fully loaded with 80 miles of pipe. This drum, floating in a special tank amidships, would be rotated by powerful engines, unreeling the Hamel pipe over the stern as the ship made its slow, precise journey across the channel. The civilian passenger ship London was also converted into a Conan ship, a testament to the all-hands effort this operation required. The initial laying attempts were met with a predictable series of setbacks and harsh lessons. The first HAIS pipeline from Sandown to Cherbourg was successfully laid by HMS Latimer in early August, but a few days later, a passing Allied destroyer, entirely unaware of the top-secret operation, snagged the line with its anchor and severed it. Repairing a breach on the seabed was a nightmare scenario that highlighted the vulnerability of the system. The first Hamel line, laid by the Holdfast, also failed shortly after becoming operational due to a fault in the pipe itself. These initial failures were disheartening and delayed the flow of fuel. Sir Donald Banks, the Director General of the Petroleum Warfare Department, noted that while the cable-laying process had been largely mastered, the final steps of connecting the shore ends and dealing with undersea leaks remained a significant and frustrating challenge. Despite these setbacks, persistence eventually paid off. After repairs and renewed efforts, the first pipeline from the Isle of Wight to Cherbourg was successfully commissioned on September 18, 1944, with the Hamel line following on September 29. However, this achievement came with a sobering reality. The planners had hoped for Pluto to be operational within a few weeks of D-Day. The successful commissioning in late September meant it was nearly 3 months behind schedule. Then, a new problem emerged. On October 3, both the newly operational lines failed again, this time due to an overestimation of the fuel pumping capacity, which caused fatal stress on the pipes. The Cherbourg line was subsequently abandoned. The dream of an immediate, seamless flow of fuel had collided with the hard realities of wartime engineering. The autumn of 1944 saw Operation PLUTO finally overcome its teething troubles and evolve into the reliable fuel artery its creators had envisioned. With the failure of the initial Cherbourg line, efforts were redirected to a more promising route. Codenamed Dumbo, this new network of pipelines stretched a shorter, more manageable 70 miles from Dungeness on the English coast to Ambleteuse, near Boulogne in France. This route benefited from the Allies' eastward advance, which had liberated the Pas-de-Calais region and its more sheltered coastal waters. The Bambi line to Cherbourg was largely abandoned, and the focus shifted entirely to the Dumbo network, which would become the workhorse of the Pluto system. The expansion of the pipeline network on the continent was a feat of military engineering in its own right. As the front line advanced, so did the pipelines. From the initial terminal at Ambleteuse, a complex web of inland pipelines, some repurposed from German fuel systems, snaked its way forward. These pipelines supplied crucial forward depots at La Haye-du-Puits, Lessy, Saint-Lô, and Vire, keeping pace with the relentless momentum of Patton's Third Army and other Allied formations. Back in England, the pumping stations that fed the undersea lines were masterpieces of camouflage. These critical installations, capable of generating the immense pressure needed to push fuel across the channel, were ingeniously concealed within what appeared to be innocent cottages, bungalows, and garages, making them virtually invisible to German reconnaissance. On the ground in Normandy and beyond, the system came to life through the efforts of the Allied Petroleum Service. At distribution points, thousands of vehicles would queue in a disciplined, orderly fashion to receive their lifeblood. The fuel, having traveled silently beneath the ocean, was now transferred into the ubiquitous 5-gallon jerrycans. These were then loaded onto trucks, most famously the vehicles of the Red Ball Express, for the final journey to the frontline units. The statistics tell the story of Pluto's eventual success. After a slow start, the volume of fuel delivered grew exponentially. In January 1945, the system delivered a daily average of 305 tons. By March, this figure had surged to 3,048 tons per day, peaking at over 4,000 tons daily in May. Cumulatively, between D-Day and VE Day, Pluto pumped a staggering 781,000 cubic meters of fuel, over 172 million imperial gallons, from Britain to the continent. It had become a vital, if belated, component in the Allied logistical machine. The story of Operation Pluto does not conclude with a simple tally of gallons delivered. Its historical legacy is a complex tapestry woven with threads of brilliant engineering, operational delay, and strategic foresight, making it one of the most debated specialized operations of the Second World War. To assess its true value, one must weigh its tangible shortcomings against its less quantifiable, yet profound, strategic and psychological contributions. From a purely statistical and operational standpoint, contemporary critics had a strong case. The pipeline network was not operational during the most critical phase of the campaign, the first 3 months after D-Day. During the summer and autumn of 1944, when Patton's tanks were racing across France and fuel was the absolute determinant of offensive speed, Pluto provided a meager 0.16% of the total fuel consumed. The vast majority of POL needs were met by the Mulberry Harbors, conventional tankers, and the massive effort of the Red Ball Express truck convoy. Historian Derek Peyton Smith articulated this critical view, contending that Pluto contributed nothing to Allied supplies at a time that would have been most valuable, that is, when no regular oil ports were available on the continent. Even within the Allied command, figures like Major General Sir Frederick Morgan of Cossack found the initial Bambi network to be of limited value, though he conceded the later Dumbo line was more successful. However, to judge Pluto solely on its initial delays is to miss its greater strategic context. The operation was, first and foremost, a masterpiece of contingency planning. The entire Overlord plan was built on mitigating risk, and the threat to conventional fuel tankers from U-boats and the Luftwaffe was considered severe. That this threat did not fully materialize does not invalidate the prudence of preparing for it. Pluto was the Allies' secret insurance policy. Had German E-boats and aircraft successfully interdicted the channel supply routes, the Pluto network stood ready to become the primary fuel lifeline, an option completely unknown to and undetectable by the German High Command. Furthermore, its value as a feat of morale and industrial ingenuity cannot be discounted. Winston Churchill hailed it as a wholly British achievement and a piece of amphibious engineering skill of which we may well be proud. It demonstrated an unparalleled capacity for innovation and collaboration, uniting military departments, government agencies, and private oil corporations in a single, extraordinary goal. In the final balance, Operation Pluto's success is not found in its raw output, but in its embodiment of the Allied approach to war. It was a testament to perseverance, meticulous preparation, and the willingness to attempt the impossible to cover every conceivable contingency. Official historian Michael Postan perhaps offered the most accurate epitaph, describing Pluto as strategically important, tactically adventurous, and, from the industrial point of view, strenuous. While it did not single-handedly fuel the victory in Europe, it stands as a powerful symbol of the industrial and engineering prowess that did. Its true legacy is that of a brilliant solution to a problem that, thanks in part to its very existence, never fully materialized. The official shutdown of Operation Pluto in August 1945 did not mark the end of its story. The pipelines, having fallen silent, began a new, slower existence on the seabed, while the knowledge gained from their creation rippled outwards, influencing the post-war world in ways both concrete and philosophical. The immediate aftermath saw a practical and surprisingly profitable cleanup operation. Commencing in September 1946, salvage teams worked to recover the valuable cables and pipes. The sale of the scrap metal, primarily the high-quality copper and steel, generated significantly higher profits than anticipated, substantially offsetting the project's decommissioning costs and providing a final, unexpected fiscal victory for the endeavor. The technological legacy of Pluto is its most direct and enduring contribution. The operation served as a massive, real-world proof of concept for submarine pipelines, demonstrating their feasibility over long distances and in challenging marine environments. The engineering principles and laying techniques pioneered by Hartley and his team for the HAIS and Hamel pipes became the foundation for the global undersea oil and gas industry. The first post-war commercial submarine pipeline, laid across the English Channel in 1953 to transport fuel from the refinery at Le Havre to the UK, was a direct descendant of the Pluto technology. Today, a vast and critical network of pipelines crisscrosses the world's seabeds, supplying energy to nations and continents, a permanent industrial empire that owes a debt to the wartime ingenuity of the Pluto engineers. Beyond the hardware, Pluto's legacy is one of strategic mindset. It endures as a classic case study in the value of redundant systems and contingency planning at the highest levels of military and industrial command. It stands as a permanent reminder that victory is not only won by the courage of soldiers on the front lines but also by the foresight of planners who imagine worst-case scenarios and have the determination to build complex solutions, even when those solutions might never be needed. The operation was a monumental effort involving thousands of people from diverse backgrounds: naval officers, civilian engineers, oil company executives, and factory workers, all united by a shared, seemingly impossible goal. This spirit of collaboration in the face of a common threat remains a powerful historical narrative. Today, physical echoes of Pluto still persist. Sections of the Bambi pipeline remain on the seabed, their exact locations often lost to time, while other fragments are occasionally dredged up by fishermen or discovered on beaches, tangible relics of the secret war beneath the waves. On the Isle of Wight, remnants of the infrastructure can still be found by those who know where to look. The operation is memorialized in museums, and its story continues to be re-evaluated by historians. While its direct quantitative impact on the fuel supply of the Normandy campaign was limited, its qualitative impact as a symbol of innovation, resilience, and thorough preparation is immeasurable. Operation Pluto was not the weapon that won the war, but it was a brilliant and necessary piece of the intricate machinery that ensured the Allies could keep fighting until they did.